most Gen Zs have built up this wall of nobody except for who I so choose has the ability to influence me, because I would then just be a puddle of nothing on the floor if I didn't create that wall. And so now these Gen Zs are coming in with this massive wall in front of them, and they're not necessarily letting their employers through it.
Hello and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders tend to shy away from. We believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. I am your host, Jeff Ma, and as always, I'm here to have conversations and hear stories about how real people and real businesses might operate in today's world. And my guest today is Hannah Dannecker, and Hannah is on a mission to bridge the gap between previous working generations and Gen Z to create an open environment where we can work better together. In 2023, she published her first book entitled Well Shit, Time to Grow Up, which is a post-graduation memoir in which she explores moments from her childhood as well as her journey after graduation, sharing how she conquered imposter syndrome, uncertainty, and uncomfortable confrontations, themes that are all familiar to us on this show. Hannah is sought by HR managers, business owners, and operations teams to help them learn how to connect with Gen Z, because as a member of Gen Z herself, Hannah brings insights that business leaders can't get anywhere else about how to deal with Gen Z employees. So I'd love to welcome Hannah here to the show today. Hannah, how are you doing?
Really good, Jeff. Thank you so much. It's always so funny to hear my introductions. I'm like, yeah, tell me more. Who is this girl?
It's the most awkward thing in the world. I love it. I'm super excited about this topic. I have to be honest. I think in my line of work, where I talk and consult with people all the time, we don't avoid this specific topic, but it comes up nonstop, or at least it becomes kind of the first place people go when you talk culture. It's like, well, depending on which side you are on or where you're from, you think boomer, millennial, Gen Z, whatever, it just starts coming out. And so I've been dying to tackle this topic head on. And what an opportunity to do it with you. As I said in your intro, you a Gen Z yourself. Tell me a little bit about you. Tell me, I guess less so about the Gen Z part. We know that that's just by definition who you are. But tell me a little bit about you and where your passion. I'm really curious about your passion. What is your passion and where does it come from?
Oh my gosh, I've got way too many of them to keep track. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Canada, just a little bit north of Toronto, and my dad owned an agency the entire time I was growing up, for as long as I can recall. And it originally started as a transportation agency, and that kind of originated from my grandfather and my uncle both being truck drivers. So his original goal was to revolutionize the way that people saw transportation, because he had seen it from a different perspective where they had been treated really poorly and for no real reason. And so that was my upbringing. I was immediately thrown right into staffing and specifically into transportation. And at the time, I thought transportation was so lame, so boring. I wanted nothing to do with it. And growing up, I thought that staffing was pretty interesting, but it was definitely not where my heart lied. So I came to the spot where I was graduating high school, ready to go to university, and I really wanted a marketing degree. And somebody said, Hannah, don't do that. What they are putting and printing in those textbooks is completely irrelevant from the time that it leaves the press studio. And I was like, oh my gosh, how interesting. Everything is changing and evolving so quickly. So naturally, I was like, well, I can get an HR degree. That's the only other thing that makes sense to me, just based on my background. So I got an HR degree and I moved to Orlando, Florida. And I live here now. And I originally, when I was here, was a substitute teacher, working with kids, loving children. I started with kindergartners because I thought they'd be so fun, so easy. They are not. If you are a teacher, if you are an elementary school teacher, shout out to you. I am so impressed. Could not be me. I did not have the strength for that. So I transitioned to middle school, and I actually loved middle schoolers. I thought they were really fun. But then I landed in high school, which at the time was really funny because I was 19 years old and I was working with and substitute teaching for high schoolers, sometimes who were just as old as I was. And so this conversation kind of came up where I was communicating with them on a regular basis about what they knew and understood about the workforce ahead of them. And I was appalled by the lack of information that they had. They didn't know what they wanted to do, which is typical. Not most high schoolers do. But not only that, they didn't know what was available to them. And that broke my heart because I grew up in staffing. I was so aware that there are so many job opportunities and career opportunities for people out there, but they just didn't know. And so, fast forward, the pandemic happens. I am across in a different country from my family. The border shuts down. Naturally, I move home. This pandemic looked really different in Canada than it did here. And so I transitioned back, moved back to Canada, lived there, and started working for the family business. And as I started working for the family business, at first, to be honest, I really struggled with it. I was working in an office that had no windows for 8 hours a day. I was in the middle of a quarantine. We were doing social isolation lockdowns. You couldn't leave your house if you weren't going to your work. If you were going anywhere on the road, you could get pulled over by a cop and they could demand that they see the proof of where you were going as an essential employee. Like, it was crazy. I was not doing well mentally. And I went to my dad and I said, I love you. I love this business. I now see what we're doing. I see the concept of, okay, we feed families one shift at a time. We find jobs for people who need them. We help people who can't advocate for themselves find placement. So I was like, okay, I get this. But my word, I hate my life. Like, I see the value in what we're doing, but what we're doing is killing me every day. And so I said, I want to keep going. I want to keep doing this, but I can't keep doing it the way that it is today. And so we looked like a very typical corporate office, right? You were in before the boss, out after he leaves. You try to have the most hours. You try to always pick your phone up. I grew up on call. In high school, I was an on-call person for an agency, which means anytime that my phone rang, whether it was 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I would still pick it up. So I was living this really rigid, uncomfortable life. And I said, I want to work from home just 1 day a week. My mental health not doing well. I'm not seeing the sun. It was the middle of the winter in Canada. The sun was down when I went into work and down when I came out of work. I was like, I just live in a basement apartment, but give me at least half of a window for 1 day a week and I'll be fine. Like, that's all I need. I took an inch and ran a mile. So now we have one corporate office. We have closed down a couple different locations. We have also opened up a couple different virtual locations. So we've transitioned this company from locally in Ontario when I started a handful of years ago to now we're across Canada and the US. And these little minor changes, after he started to see the benefits of what just a little bit could do, he got super excited and took the whole thing and ran down the football field with it. So now we can operate Canada, US, and we're doing so much more than we ever have before. But through all of these changes, we started working with Gen Zs. And I was like, look at how fantastic this is. Look at how fantastic they are. Look at everything that we're doing together and how it's really working and coming out on the other side. But it took a really long road to get there. But that's how we ended up with the whole, this is what Gen Zs look like. This is what they love. This is the formula for making them come into your company, yes, but see the value in what you're doing and stay. Sorry, that was so long-winded, but that's that's the story.
It's okay. It's your episode. So we actually want you have as much space as you want.
Well, thanks.
I love that. I love that origin story, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Help me, I guess, reset, maybe for the audience more so, reset on the topic itself. What
What is
defines
Gen Z?
Gen Z? I mean, I think we all know what it is at face value, but maybe your own kind of take on it. Like, what makes Gen Z, and what's the big deal?
So the easiest way to define a Generation Z is by the year that they're born. They're born between 1997 and 2012. There's 72 million of them across the world. And they all are made up of what I would call a similar life experience that has resulted in them being who they are. Now, again, I don't love to stereotype. Everybody is very different. However, based on the way that globalization happened as they were maturing and aging, the way that technology has advanced, and then the way that COVID happened as they were becoming adults, really shaped who they are as human beings and can really make up the makeup of a lot of Gen Zs.
So I guess what's the rub? Like it comes, like I mentioned at the start, like
Mhm.
this comes up a lot. You'll talk to certain groups of people, and they'll just complain. They'll just be frustrated, or it could be positive as well. But the point is, we don't like to stereotype, but it always comes to this place where there's certain things and certain issues or certain stereotypes, if you will,
Mhm.
that just seem to kind of get people frustrated or worked up, or what are those things that you see? I mean, we can start there. What are those things that you see? Maybe you don't need to solve them yet.
Yeah, I think I think the first thing that I see most regularly that people struggle with the greatest is communication. Uh, Generation Zs don't communicate the same way that millennials or boomers or Gen X's do, or the silent generation, right? None of them. We're not communicating the same, and you and I don't communicate the same way. And me and another Gen Z who could be my very best friend in the whole wide world, even if it was my twin and we had grown up in the same household, we still would not communicate the same way. But so frequently, what happens is millennials, Gen X, boomers, silent generation, they'll gain that experience. They'll gain however much experience they have in the workforce, and they'll see the newbies come in and they will think that they know how to communicate them with them based on the experience that they have had in the past. And so it creates this rub of, oh, it's the newbie. I know exactly what to say to you because I just did it. It's like, no, you know what to say to you because you just did it. But this whole new human who has come in is completely different. And I think that that pattern we see really regularly just when it relates to senior and junior people.
Do you think that pattern has always existed, or is it more extreme? Like, why is Gen Z such a, at least in my head, maybe because I guess I'm a millennial by definition. I'm on the older end of the millennial spectrum, but like when I was a new and upcoming employee in the workforce,
Mhm.
there were generations above me, and we suffered from, sure, communication problems and new changes in expectations, but it it didn't feel as drastic. And maybe I was on the wrong side of things, but at the same time, it didn't feel as drastic as like today, where it feels like there's sometimes a complete just wall of understanding that
Yeah.
is in place.
Yeah. So I think you're right. It is very different this time. I could be wrong because I've never experienced it before from the other
Sure,
side. So that's hard
sure.
for me to say, but I do think that it is different this time. And here's why. Um, Based on the way that Gen Zs have grown up with technology, they have redefined the concept of what an influencer is, right? When I say the word influencer, what do you think of?
Social media.
Right. So social media has been around since, I'll use myself as an example because I only want to speak on my own experience here. But social media has been around since since I can remember in third grade, I've been using my mom's Facebook account. Then in seventh grade, I got some social media, oh gosh, what is it called? Snapchat. And then by the time I was in ninth grade, I started using Instagram. So it's kind of like the timeline that I have seen. And through that, the concept of influencers has evolved so greatly across so many vast platforms that as somebody who was just beginning to age, as a third grader who didn't know what it meant to not look at an ad on the side, as a seventh grader who didn't know how to properly screen the right people who were sending me requests on Snapchat, as a ninth grader who didn't know what was real and what wasn't real on the people that were most famous around me that I was looking at every single day. I had to learn to build a wall. internally that nobody else was able to see, because everybody was trying to influence me in some way, shape, or form. And most of that was being seen on social media. Now, of course, I was also being seen in your classrooms, in your homes, whatever else. Everybody has experienced the concept of influence in their life. I'm not saying that's new, but the level at which it was happening was so intense that most Gen Zs have built up this wall of nobody except for who I so choose has the ability to influence me, because I would then just be a puddle of nothing on the floor if I didn't create that wall. And so now these Gen Zs are coming in with this massive wall in front of them, and they're not necessarily letting their employers through it. Whereas previously, millennials came in and they're like, oh, my boss is so smart. This is the perfect person for me to learn from. And now Gen Zs are coming in and saying, I know that my boss thinks that they're really smart, and let me hear what they have to say. But I'm also going to go back and fact check it with everything else I know and all of these other resources and pieces of information. And unless you can validate what you're already saying by the research that they're doing behind the scenes, that wall will not continue to come down, and it'll just get bigger and thicker and harder. So you're right. It's totally different. And that's why I think, at least that's why I think, but I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, that's my favorite explanation or at least breakdown I've ever heard, because
Good,
I
I'm
haven't
so glad.
I haven't had that clarity, honestly, because I think people are more focused on almost the symptoms,
Mm,
and like what they see and the who's right, who's wrong. You
mhm,
hear a lot about like work ethic, and you hear a lot about like complaining or like kind of not respecting authority or respect and stuff like this. And those are all symptoms. And
mhm.
what you just shared, what I heard was like a root cause and something that's deeper rooted than just characterizing and coloring a whole generation as not having the same values, but really
Yeah.
it's an experience. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
You've morphed my head right now into
Yay,
a
I'm
whole
so
nother
glad.
space.
I'm so
Um,
glad.
but I guess that naturally brings me to questions about like what is the bridge? What is the way to bring the walls down? And who's that on? Because that's another big question, I guess, is that you I mean, Gen Z will at some point, just by the laws of nature, inherit the earth, and be in all the leadership positions. They'll be all the, they'll be who's here leading the way.
Mhm.
But between now and then, is it on the which generation needs to
Yeah,
fix themselves first, and
yeah,
who has to step up and change?
yeah,
Like that's the big
yeah.
questions people have.
Well, I think it's everybody, you know? It's not necessarily fair to say that it is on the employers to make that and break that and follow through with that, but it's also not fair to say that it's on the employees either, or any generation who falls into any of those categories, right? The hard thing is that there are more boomers than there were Gen Zs. There are more millennials. There are more Gen Xers than there are Gen Zs. And that pattern is continuing, right? The birth rate, replacement rate, whatever that's called, is continuing to go down. So there's less of us and more of the past. And so at some point, it is going to teeter to the um, elder generation's responsibility, because there's going to be less of the younger generation. So it's going to mean that it's more important for them to do it, because they're going to have less opportunity to do so with the less amount of Gen Zs. So that does play like a little role. And I mean, obviously understanding they are more mature, they have had the opportunity to experience this before. So I would hope that that person is going to try and take the larger half of the responsibility, but it absolutely goes both ways, right? Like a Gen Z can only be as strong as the people in front of them, but the people in front of them can only be as strong as the ones who stand behind. Like it really does play back and forth a lot. So, but I think that the majority, if there were to have to be one, would end up with the employer.
So what kind of things need to happen, I
What,
guess? Like
what
like
needs? What do we do?
what do we do? What do we do about this?
Yeah, I tell people, and it's a funny sentence, but I tell people to listen. And when I say listen, what I mean is I want you to listen to learn. I want you to learn to understand, and then I want you to understand to speak. But often what we do is we skip to the very last step and we just start speaking because we heard something and we think that we know what they're saying, but we don't. And so we need to first listen to learn, try and understand what they're saying, regurgitate it back to them. Say, is this what I heard from you? Did I understand that properly? And then when you do understand what they're trying to say to you is when you take the opportunity to respond. And that in itself solves so many problems just between the communication barrier. That, hey, did I hear this correctly from you? Is, I mean, going to solve so many of your problems. Just try that with your significant other tonight when you get into a fight. See if that helps, because what you hear and what they say are not always the same thing. But outside of that, it's so much just about having a mutual respect for everybody around you, right? Look at the person that you're having a conversation with and understand that they're probably not out to get you. Even if you guys are bashing and hitting heads, try and take a huge step back and say, maybe we're just not on the same page here. Let's try and reevaluate, readjust. Help me understand what you meant by that. The statement, help me understand, is my favorite sentence. I've probably used it thousands of times this year already. But just what did you mean by that? Before I start to put my own impressions on what I think you meant, just tell me, just ask more. It's so much more about communication. And it's not that easy to do.
Help me understand more about, I guess, your perspective kind of going outward, right? Like right now we've been talking a lot about like we're all here at the 30,000 foot level.
Yeah.
And talking about just everyone in business and just generalizing everything. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm just statistically, I know that my audience is going to be um, older right now than
Mm-hmm.
Gen Z. I know I have a few, but I think the people who listen to this show who are trying to, like really love as a business strategy is about change and about changing our mindsets and changing how we do business and all that stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge passion of mine. And I think the audience that I share this with is kind of in the same place where, I don't consider, I don't look at a Gen Z as a generation and think, oh, problematic or anything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I do consistently see this being the platform in which people have their frustrations and arguments on.
Mm-hmm.
And having you on the show gives me a unique opportunity. I think the audience a unique opportunity to just truly like, I would love to like peer into your head. Like
Okay, let me open
what
it up for
does,
you.
yeah, like help me and everyone understand, I guess. Like what is that Gen Z, like what are you seeing from your side? What do you think of? What does it invoke in you when you think boomer, Gen X, millennial? What do you think when you think of the corporate workspace? I mean, what do you think of when you hear love as a business strategy? Like, is it you just rolling your eyes and like, oh my gosh, or is it like, what do you want to see out of that? I know that's a big, really involved question, but that's kind of what I want the most out of you.
Yeah, I mean, love is a business strategy. I love that. I come from a family business, and I tell people all the time that family business is business with a heart. So that's, I mean, very relevant, but that's much more about my upbringing and much less about my Gen Z demographic. I think Gen Zs, are you trying to understand like a simple approach to getting them to stay? Are you trying to understand? Sorry, I just
No,
need
I
a little
think,
more
yeah, I
clarity.
think it's less tactical and more
Okay.
just curiosity around. I
What's in
think
my brain?
I can, yeah, I can, I've picked the brains of boomers, Gen X's, millennials all the time.
Mhm.
And because we communicate the same way, it's been quick and easy. And I think a lot of our interactions at this with the Gen Z, groups have been more, either professional or problem solving or pointed in one direction. I don't think we've
Sure.
taken enough time to just be curious and hear what it's like to be Gen Z, what Gen Z
Oh,
sees of the world. Like what are you, and you shared kind of one aspect of it. Like that's why it blew my mind when you said like you grew up with influencers and how that shaped everything. Like that kind of stuff is like really missing from the conversation. And
sure.
so I guess it's kind of a lot of pressure to say, hey, speak on behalf of all Gen Zs, but at
Yeah,
the
no,
same
I
time,
that helps me understand where you're going with it. So yeah, in there's two pieces to that, right? What's it like to be a Gen Z and what makes us who we are? So what makes us who we are piece, that piece is very similar to the social media, the technology, but in a different vein. I would tell people globalization makes a Gen Z who they are. We grew up in a period of time where we could fly across the world and be in a different place tomorrow. And that was extremely normal. And while, yes, it was a blessing, don't get me wrong, people who went on vacations as kids, that was a blessing, but it wasn't out of the norm. Whereas my mom would say that, and she would say, oh my gosh, someone who went on a week vacation, like my grandmother went on 1 week vacation her entire life. And that was the peak of her existence, as far as my mother understands it. Whereas that's not what my experience was, because of the way that globalization has changed. And we've been able to do that so readily and so easy. And so that's really changed your Gen Z. Time and space don't really mean that much to them. Where they are doesn't mean that much to them. So asking them to come in and be in your office is asking a whole lot more of a Gen Z than it is of asking a millennial, because their experience is just very different. That means more to them. It makes more sense to them. A Gen Z, however, with light of what happened with globalization and then this other massive thing called COVID-19, they were becoming what I call baby adults. When they were experiencing COVID-19, they were graduating from children into their baby adulthood, where they were trying to figure out what it meant to exist. And for so many of them, their education experience got completely pushed online. And so, again, that time, that space awareness was so much less important. And so, again, asking a Gen Z to show up from 8 to 5 in this specific location is a lot harder, because that's not their makeup anymore. It's not what they've understood to be necessary or relevant in their existence. So, COVID-19, globalization, and technology are the three massive things that I would say really, really affect a Gen Z and kind of how they are the way they are. But then, what is it like to be a Gen Z? Um, it's hard, to be honest with you. It's a little challenging. I personally have just gone through a what I am calling a detoxification of my social medias, and have been doing it all summer. But I went from I've got all of them, to deleting 3 or 4 of them off of my phone, and it has taken my phone time down 2 hours. So if I think about the 2 hours that I spent every single day looking through social media at other people's crap, because let's be honest, not all of it's real. Um, and then I think about, okay, I've been doing that for 2 months now. I don't even know. I should be able to do that math very easily. 2 times 60. So 120 hours through the summer that I've not spent judging myself. Most Gen Zs, when they're on social media, yes, they're looking at people. Yes, they're seeing stuff, but they're actually judging their own lives up against every single person that they see. So if you think about every social media that every Gen Z has, and you think about all of the time that they have spending on it, a lot of them are creating self-deprecating thoughts through those things. That, just this past month, in these past 2 months, has completely changed so much of the way that my brain chemistry works. I'm nicer to myself. I'm more patient with myself. I don't care as much about the people who really don't matter. And I do care so much more about the people that really do. And it's a lot easier to see. And that's just 2 months. But Gen Zs have been doing that since they were kids. And so it's really interesting just to zone in to one small, tiny aspect of what that might look like, and how they were raised to be just mean to themselves. And I mean, just social media. Let's talk, if you want to talk about housing costs and the cost of food and the cost of the price of a first average wage comparatively year over year, that's also very different. And it's really hard to be a Gen Z, just in this experience with the what's the proper word? Economy right now. But that's like a whole different thing, and a completely separate topic. But that's a small dive into a very large bird's eye view for you. Tiny peek into my brain.
And I just appreciate that so much. Like, I think the one thing I'm taking away is, and this is not because I'm just littered with opportunities to interact with tons and tons of diverse amounts of Gen Z, but I definitely haven't made a lot of space in my brain to like go and like have that curiosity
Mm,
because like the things you brought today around these like real lived experience, like it's been no secret that there's some factors that make Gen Z, like living through the pandemic in certain ways. Yeah, but I think people take that at face value quite a bit, and we don't like kind of like put ourselves like the way you've been able to kind of paint the picture of like growing up in certain environments and like how that really shapes. It's just so important. I think it's just incredibly important.
mhm.
And so I really appreciate you bringing those things today because it's really sparked this like realization in me. And I don't know what I'm gonna do with it yet, but but it's amazing.
Even if the realization is next time you're talking to a Gen Z and you have an order that you have to give that Gen Z because they have to do something for you, it's saying, "Hey, how do you think this would work? And would you mind helping me with it?" Rather than, "Hey, this is for you. I expect it by Friday." Right? Like
Yeah.
it's all about communication. Honestly, if you just bring a little bit of love into your communication, you'll be so much better off on the end.
Well, that fits the theme perfectly.
There you
Uh,
go. Almost like I teed it up for you intentionally.
Hannah, I really appreciate your time and all the things that you brought to the show today. So thank you so much for joining me and gosh, just bringing great stuff today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and I love the chance to talk about Gen Zs. It's always fun. So thanks for giving me the platform to do it.
Sure. Anything you want to plug or share with the audience? Oh,
I so yes, I have that book, the Well Shit book. That's specifically all for Gen Zs. You can find that. That's very boomer endorsed. It's meant for kids who are graduating university and they're graduating. They're going, oh shit, what do I do? So it's the best card you could give them for a graduation. I like to tell people, but I also have. Oh my gosh, I'm about to read. I'm about to publish another one. I think one, two, three. This will be my fifth book I'm publishing, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the next 3 weeks. I'm really excited about it. It's my first kids book. And so I would
oh,
love for people to check that out. But you can find all of my stuff on x2z.org. And yeah, all of my links, all of my everything to get help with hiring. If you actually need one of these Gen Zs and you're like, hey, Hannah, this sounds great, but I need some more applicable steps, come chat with me. I can help you find one. But yeah, that's the
that's
best place to find me.
awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for joining today. I hope you continue listening and giving us that feedback. If you haven't, as always, I don't think I've done a single episode where I don't continue to plug Love as a Business Strategy, the book itself. Don't know why you're here if you haven't read it yet, but go read it and subscribe and rate the podcast if you can. With that, we will be seeing each other in 2 weeks, is how often I've been posting now, at least as of now. So we'll see everybody in 2 weeks and have a good one.
Bye.